I never liked Christmas lights after 2006. The way they blink on and off, how the colors wash over dark windows, reminds me too much of that winter in western Pennsylvania when a holiday meant for families turned into a search for bones buried under frozen ground. Back then, I worked as a county road maintenance supervisor. My crew handled snowplows, fallen trees, blocked rural roads, jobs no one thought about unless something went wrong. Christmas week was usually quiet. People stayed home. The roads emptied. That year, though, the weather turned cruel. A lake effect system rolled in on December 22nd and didn't leave. By Christmas Eve, some back roads had 6-foot drifts, and a handful of old farmhouses were completely cut off. At 7:12 p.m. on Christmas Eve, my radio crackled with a call that didn't make sense. A woman named Ruth Calder had phoned 911 from a landline. She was crying, saying she could hear someone walking around her house. Dispatch told her deputies would take hours to reach her location, and she asked if the county could plow the access road so help could get in. Her address made my stomach drop. Ruth Calder lived alone in a farmhouse that sat at the end of Ridge Spur Road, a narrow, half-forgotten path that cut into state forest land. We rarely plowed it because only one house remained occupied. The Calders had lived there for generations, but most of the family had moved away after a series of deaths in the late 1980s. Fires, accidents, one disappearance no one liked to talk about. I told dispatch we'd go. My driver that night was a guy named Alan Brooks, a Vietnam vet with a dry sense of humor and nerves made of iron. When I told him where we were headed, he went quiet. "No one's been out there since October," he said. The plow chewed through snow as we turned onto Ridge Spur Road. Trees leaned in from both sides, their branches bowed under the weight of ice. The headlights revealed something that bothered me immediately. Footprints. They crossed the road in several places. Not animal tracks. Bare human feet pressed deep into the snow. Long strides. Too long. And they didn't follow the road. They wandered, circling back on themselves, as if whoever made them didn't know where they were going. Alan slowed the truck. "You see that?" I nodded. "Could be Ruth," I said, though I didn't believe it. No elderly woman walks barefoot in sub-zero weather. The farther we went, the worse it got. The prints multiplied. Some overlapped, some vanished abruptly. In a few spots, it looked like someone had dragged something heavy through the snow. We reached the farmhouse just after 8 p.m. The place was dark, except for the glow of Christmas lights strung unevenly along the porch railing. Red, green, blue. They blinked slowly, reflecting off the snow like emergency lights. The front door stood open. I called out, "County road crew? Ruth?" No answer. The silence out there wasn't normal. Snow usually dampens sound, but this felt thicker, heavier, like the air itself was holding its breath. We stepped onto the porch. The doorframe was splintered inward, as though someone had forced their way inside from the outside. On the wood, carved deep and jagged, were words that hadn't been there the last time I'd been out that way. We were promised. Inside, the house smelled of old wood, candle wax, and something sour underneath it all. The living room was tidy, almost obsessively so. A Christmas tree stood in the corner, decorated with handmade ornaments, paper angels, popcorn strings, faded photographs laminated and tied with red yarn. Every photo showed the same group of people, the Calder family, spanning decades. All of the faces had been scratched out. "Ruth?" Alan called again. The sound of movement came from the back of the house. Slow footsteps. Shuffling. We followed the noise down a narrow hallway. The walls were lined with framed newspaper clippings. I recognized a few headlines. Local farm fire claims 3 hunter found dead in state forest search, called off for missing man. At the end of the hall was the kitchen. The light was on. Ruth Calder sat at the table, her back to us. Her gray hair hung loose around her shoulders. Her hands rested flat on the table, palms down. Something dark was smeared across her wrists. "Ruth," I said gently, "we're here to get you out." She didn't turn around. "They came back," she said quietly. Her voice was steady. Too steady. Alan took a step closer. "Who came back?" She laughed then. A short, broken sound. "The ones we fed." I noticed the table. It was covered in plates. More plates than one person could use. Each held scraps of raw meat, stiff and dark with cold. Behind Ruth, the back door hung open. Beyond it, the forest pressed close, branches swaying though there was no wind. "We should go," Alan whispered. Ruth turned her head slowly. Her eyes were wide, bloodshot, and shining with something close to relief. They were children, she said. That winter was so hard. No money, no roads. My father said God would forgive us if we shared. Shared what? I asked, dread flooding my chest. She smiled. What we had. A crash came from the living room. Then another. Heavy footsteps, multiple sets, pounding through the house. Alan grabbed my arm. Move, now. We ran for the front door as the sounds closed in behind us, bare feet slapping wood, nails scraping walls. As we burst onto the porch, something slammed into the doorframe, just inches from my head. I turned long enough to see it. Tall, naked, skin gray and stretched tight over bone. Its face was wrong, mouth too wide, eyes sunken and reflective like a deer's caught in headlights. Its arms were too long, fingers ending in cracked, filthy nails. Behind it were more shapes, crowding the doorway, pressing forward. Ruth stepped out onto the porch behind them. Go, she said calmly. You don't belong to them. The thing closest to us lunged, but she grabbed it, wrapping her arms around its waist. It shrieked, a high, furious sound. They promised, she screamed now, her composure gone. They promised they'd stop if we fed them. The creatures dragged her backward into the house. The door slammed shut with enough force to rattle the windows. Alan and I didn't argue. We ran to the truck, tires spinning as we tore back down Ridge Spur Road. In the mirrors, I saw shapes moving between the trees, keeping pace with us without effort. One of them stepped into the headlights briefly. It was smiling. We made it to the main road and didn't slow down until we hit the county garage, where deputies were already gathering. When we told them what we'd seen, no one laughed. They went back out with more vehicles, more men. They found the house empty. No Ruth, no bodies, no blood. The only thing left behind was the kitchen table, set with plates that held nothing but gnawed bones, small ones, human ones. The official report said Ruth Calder suffered a mental breakdown and fled into the woods, likely succumbing to the elements. The case closed quietly. Ridge Spur Road was permanently removed from winter maintenance schedules. A steel gate went up at the turnoff. But that wasn't the end. Over the years, hunters reported seeing lights deep in the forest in December. Campers vanished. Children in nearby towns talked about tall, naked men standing at the edge of their yards on Christmas Eve, watching through windows, leaving long, bare footprints that melted by morning. Last year, I was driving home late on December 24th when my headlights caught something standing on the shoulder of the road. For a split second, I thought it was a person who needed help. Then it smiled. I don't decorate anymore. I don't leave lights on. And every Christmas Eve, I lock my doors and listen to the woods behind my house, waiting for footsteps in the snow. Because some traditions don't die, they just get hungry again. Story the end. Christmas Eve of 2011 was the last time I ever volunteered to work late, and it's the reason I don't decorate my house anymore. I live alone now, by choice, and every December I leave town until January. People who know me say I'm paranoid. I let them think that. The truth is worse. I was a deputy sheriff back then, stationed in a rural part of western Pennsylvania. The county was mostly farmland and woods, dotted with small towns that closed up early in winter. On Christmas Eve, calls were usually quiet. Noise complaints, the occasional drunk, maybe a domestic dispute that flared up under the stress of the holidays. That night, a heavy snowstorm had rolled in around dusk, and by midnight, the world outside looked erased. At 11:46 p.m., dispatch crackled through my radio. Unit 12, report of a welfare check. Elderly male, no contact for several days. Address is Hollow Creek Road. I remember groaning softly. Hollow Creek Road was 15 miles out, no cell service, barely plowed. I asked dispatch if it could wait until morning. Family insists, the dispatcher said. Says he always calls on Christmas Eve. Didn't this year. I turned the cruiser around. The drive out was miserable. Snow piled up faster than the plows could handle, and the trees along the road bent inward under the weight, creating a tunnel of darkness. My headlights barely reached beyond the swirling white. The radio cut in and out, filled with static and distant Christmas music from some station fighting to stay alive. About halfway there, I saw something standing in the road. I slowed immediately. At first I thought it was a deer, but it didn't move. As I crept closer, my stomach tightened. It was a man. He stood perfectly still in the middle of the road, facing away from me. No coat, no hat, just thin pants and a flannel shirt soaked with snow. Bare feet pressed into the ice. I stopped the cruiser 10 feet away and rolled down the window. "Sir," I shouted. "You okay?" He didn't react. I stepped out, boots crunching loudly. The cold bit through my uniform. "Sir, you're going to get hurt standing there." Still nothing. I approached slowly, hand near my holster. "Sir, I need you to." He turned. His face was slack, skin pale and waxy, eyes wide and glassy like a corpse pulled from water. His mouth opened slowly, stretching too far. "Did he send you?" he asked. His voice was wrong, too calm, too flat. "Who?" I asked. The man tilted his head, listening to something I couldn't hear. Snow gathered on his eyelashes, but he didn't blink. "He doesn't like visitors," he said. Then he stepped backward, straight off the road and into the woods, without breaking eye contact. I shouted and lunged forward, but the trees swallowed him instantly. No crashing branches, no footprints, nothing. I stood there longer than I should have, heart hammering, the silence pressing in. Eventually, I convinced myself it was hypothermia-induced delirium. People did strange things in cold like this. I got back in the cruiser and continued toward Hollow Creek Road. The house was exactly where dispatch said it would be. An old 2-story farmhouse, sagging porch, windows dark, except for a faint glow in the living room. Snow covered the driveway undisturbed. No tire tracks, no footprints. I radioed dispatch to let them know I'd arrived, but only static answered. I knocked on the door. No response. I knocked harder. "Sheriff's Department!" Still nothing. The door was unlocked. The smell hit me first. Stale, metallic, wrong. The living room was dimly lit by a single lamp. Christmas decorations were everywhere. A tree stood in the corner, lights blinking weakly, ornaments dusty and old. Presents sat unopened beneath it. An elderly man sat in a recliner facing the tree. "Sir?" I said cautiously. He didn't move. I stepped closer and immediately knew he was dead. His skin was gray, eyes sunken, mouth slightly open. He'd been dead for days. But his eyes moved. They rolled slowly toward me, focusing. I stumbled back, nearly falling. He smiled. "You're late," he said. I drew my weapon, hands shaking. "Sir, don't move." He chuckled, a wet, rattling sound. "He's already here." The lights flickered. The house creaked, settling under some unseen weight. I heard footsteps upstairs, slow, heavy, deliberate. My radio burst to life in a wash of static and whispers layered over one another. "Deputy, deputy, don't look at it." I backed toward the door, never taking my eyes off the man. His grin widened impossibly, stretching the skin of his cheeks until it cracked and bled. "He wears us when it's cold," the man whispered. "Keeps us warm." The footsteps above stopped. Something began descending the stairs. Each step groaned under its weight. I turned and ran. I barely made it onto the porch before something slammed into the door behind me, hard enough to bow the wood outward. I sprinted for the cruiser, slipping in the snow, lungs burning. The engine turned over once, twice, then died. The headlights flickered and went out. Behind me, the house door creaked open. I could hear breathing now, slow, deep, savoring the air. Snow crunched under heavy footsteps. I grabbed my flashlight and spun around. It stood at the edge of the porch light. Tall, too tall. Its limbs were long and bent wrong, as if they'd been broken and set incorrectly. Its skin looked like layered fabric, different colors, stitched together poorly. Faces pressed beneath the surface, stretching, screaming silently. It took one step forward. I fired. The shot echoed into the woods, deafening. The thing didn't flinch. It just tilted its head, curious. It spoke in a dozen voices at once. "Christmas is for sharing." It lunged. I don't remember how I got the cruiser started. I don't remember driving away. I only remember waking up hours later, my car wrapped around a snowbank miles down the road, engine still running. Search teams went out at dawn. They found the house empty. No body, no decorations, no furniture. Just bare floors and walls like the place had never been lived in. The case was quietly closed. Hypothermia, hallucinations, stress. They suspended me anyway. I didn't argue. Every Christmas Eve since then, people go missing in that county. Drifters, elderly folks, someone driving alone through a storm. Always Hollow Creek Road. Sometimes, when the snow is heavy and the night is quiet, people report seeing someone standing in the road, waiting, barefoot. And if you stop, it remembers you. Story the end. Christmas Eve, 1998, is the night I stopped believing that bad things only happen to careless people. I was careful. I was sober. I followed rules. None of that mattered. At the time, I was 27 and working as an overnight home health aide in rural Illinois, bouncing between small towns where cornfields stretched farther than streetlights. My job paid better on holidays, so I volunteered to cover Christmas Eve for a coworker with kids. Most of my clients were elderly, alone, or both, the kind of people whose families sent money instead of visits. My last stop of the night was a man named Harold Benton, 84 years old, widowed, living in a farmhouse 10 miles outside of town. He'd had a mild stroke the year before and needed help bathing and taking medication. I'd been assigned to him for about 2 months and never had trouble. Quiet man. Polite. Always watched the Weather Channel with the volume too loud. The first strange thing happened when I pulled into his driveway at 10:45 p.m. All the lights were on. Every single one. House, barn, porch, even the floodlight by the old well. Harold never did that. He hated wasting electricity. I sat in my car for a minute, engine running, watching the snow drift down through the beams of light. I almost called the agency to ask if anyone had been sent earlier. I didn't. The door was unlocked. That wasn't unusual, but the heat inside was cranked so high it felt like walking into a sauna. Harold usually complained if it went above 68. His television was off. No Weather Channel hum. The house felt hollow, like sound didn't move right. "Harold?" I called. No answer. I set my bag down and walked through the living room. Everything looked normal at first glance. Tree in the corner, real pine, decorated sparsely with old ornaments. A single present underneath wrapped in brown paper with twine. Then I noticed the smell. Not rot, not smoke, something sharp and metallic, like pennies rubbed together. I followed it toward the back of the house, past the bathroom, toward Harold's bedroom. The door was closed. I knocked. "Harold, it's Claire." Nothing. I opened it. The bed was empty. Sheets pulled tight, hospital corners neat. His clothes were gone from the chair where he usually tossed them. His slippers were missing. The window was open. Snow blew in lightly, dusting the floor. I stood there confused, trying to make sense of it. Harold barely walked without a cane. There was no way he'd gone outside alone that weather. Then I heard the radio, not from the house, from the barn. It was faint but unmistakable. A Christmas station. Bing Crosby, muffled by distance. My skin prickled. Harold hadn't set foot in the barn since I'd known him. The steps were uneven, and he was terrified of falling. I should have left. I know that now. Instead, I grabbed my phone and walked toward the back door, dialing 911 as I went. No signal. That wasn't unusual out there, but it didn't help. The snow had picked up, wind biting at my face as I crossed the yard. The barn door was partially open, light spilling out. The radio grew louder with each step. Inside, the barn was warmer than it should have been. Space heaters glowed red along the walls. The smell hit me full force now. Blood. Harold was sitting in a chair near the workbench, at least most of him was. He was dressed neatly, clean clothes, hair combed. His hands rested in his lap like he was waiting for something. His eyes were open, glassy, staring straight ahead. His throat was cut so cleanly it looked unreal. I don't remember screaming, but my throat burned afterward, so I must have. I stumbled back, slipped in the snow, scrambled to my feet. Then I saw the footprints. They led from the house to the barn, and then back, more than one set. Heavy boots, deep impressions. They didn't wander. They marched, purposeful, organized. The radio clicked off. "Claire," someone said behind me. I spun around. A man stood in the barn doorway, blocking my exit. He wore a red Santa jacket, the cheap felt kind you buy at a drugstore. His beard was real, gray and yellowed with nicotine. His eyes were pale blue and unsettlingly calm. "You're early," he said. I told him to move. I told him I'd called the police. I lied badly. My hands shook so hard I nearly dropped my phone. He smiled. "Good. They should see this." Another man stepped out from behind a stack of hay bales, then another. 3 total, all dressed the same. Red jackets, work boots. One of them held a video camera. "You're not supposed to be here," the one with the camera said. "We do this after midnight." I backed toward the workbench, my heart hammering. I asked them why. I asked them what they wanted. The first man shrugged. "Tradition." They told me, calmly, like explaining a hobby, that they'd been doing this for years. Picking people no one would miss right away. Lonely, old, isolated. They called it keeping Christmas honest. Said too many people forgot what sacrifice meant. Harold had been chosen weeks earlier. They'd been visiting him, pretending to be church volunteers, gaining trust, learning his schedule. They'd planned to leave him in the barn to freeze after, make it look like a heart attack or animal attack. My showing up early complicated things. They argued about me while I stood there shaking, whether to let me go, whether I'd talk, whether it mattered. The man with the camera kept filming. People like watching this later, he said. Makes it real. I don't know what finally made them decide. Maybe they were tired. Maybe they thought no one would believe me. The first man stepped aside and pointed toward the door. Go, he said, but don't come back. I ran. I didn't stop until I reached my car. I locked the doors, started the engine, and drove blind through the snow until my phone picked up signal and I could barely speak to the dispatcher. The police came. State troopers. Investigators. News vans eventually. They caught 2 of the men within days. One died in a shootout when they tried to arrest him. The third disappeared. The story made local news for about a week. Holiday killing shocks rural community. Then it faded. They said Harold died instantly, that he didn't suffer. They said I was brave. They never found the tapes. I quit my job, moved to Chicago, tried to forget. But every Christmas Eve since, something happens. In 2002, I got a package with no return address. Inside was a VHS tape and a note that said, "You missed the best part." I didn't own a VCR. I threw it away unopened. In 2007, I heard footsteps outside my apartment door at midnight. Heavy boots, 3 sets. When I opened the door, no one was there. Just a small wreath hanging from the knob. In 2015, I woke up to find my TV turned on to a Christmas movie I hadn't selected. The volume was muted, the reflection in the dark screen someone standing behind my couch. When I turned around, there was nothing there. Last year, my father died. Natural causes, hospice, peaceful. As we cleaned out his house, I found a brown paper-wrapped present under his tree. No name on it. Inside was one of Harold's old ornaments, a little wooden angel with chipped wings. I don't tell people this anymore. They smile politely when I mention I don't celebrate Christmas. They say trauma fades. They're wrong. Some people keep traditions alive no matter how far you run. Some horrors don't end with arrests or headlines. They wait. They remember. And every Christmas Eve, just before midnight, I swear I can smell blood mixed with pine and hear a radio playing softly somewhere nearby, reminding me that I survived by accident, not mercy. Story the end. The year it happened, Christmas Eve fell on a Tuesday, and the weather reports kept using words like historic and dangerous. Northern Minnesota was buried under snow so deep it swallowed cars whole, and the temperature dropped to levels the meteorologists said could kill exposed skin in minutes. I worked nights as a dispatcher for the county sheriff's department, which meant I spent most holidays alone in a concrete building with flickering fluorescent lights and a coffee pot that never quite worked right. I didn't mind. I'd grown used to it. Calls started slow that night. A slide off here, a stranded motorist there, mostly people who should have stayed home but didn't. Around 7:40 p.m., the first strange call came in. The line crackled. Then a woman's voice whispered, "He's outside." I asked for her address. She didn't answer. "Ma'am," I said, keeping my voice calm, "I need to know where you are." "He's standing in the yard," she said. "He keeps ringing the bell." I heard a sound then, soft but distinct, like a bell chiming in the distance. "Is this an emergency?" I asked. "Yes," she said, her voice shaking. "He's wearing a Santa suit." That wasn't unusual. I'd already logged 6 drunk Santas since noon. "What's he doing that scares you?" She paused. "He's not moving." The line went dead. I called back immediately. No answer. I pinged the number and got an address just outside town, a farmhouse near a stretch of woods locals called Black Timber. I radioed a deputy to check it out, though he sounded irritated about being sent out in the storm. While I waited, the calls picked up. Another woman. Same whisper, same words. "He's outside." Different address. Same description. Santa suit. Standing still. By 9 o'clock, I'd logged 7 calls like that. All from isolated homes. All from people who sounded genuinely terrified. 2 lines went dead mid-sentence. When deputies were dispatched, they found nothing. No footprints. No person. Just snow untouched except for the residents' own tracks. At 9:22 p.m., a call came in that made my stomach drop. "He's inside now," a man whispered. "Sir, how did he get inside?" I asked. "I opened the door," the man said, his voice trembling. I thought it was my neighbor. He said his truck broke down. I heard slow, heavy footsteps through the phone. Not rushed, not panicked, just deliberate. "Sir," I said, louder now, "where are you in the house?" "I'm in the bathroom," he whispered. "He's in the living room. He keeps looking at the tree. I could hear something else too, a low sound like fabric dragging across the floor. Is he armed? I asked. No, the man said. He's holding a bag. It's moving. The footsteps stopped. Then a voice came through the phone that did not belong to the man. Christmas is for sharing, it said. The line went dead. I sent every available unit to that address. It took them 30 minutes to reach the place because of the snow. When they arrived, the front door was open. The house was warm. Lights were on. The Christmas tree stood in the corner, ornaments still swaying slightly. The man was gone. There were no signs of a struggle, no blood, no footprints leading away from the house. Just one thing the deputies couldn't explain. The fireplace had been ripped open, not broken, ripped like someone had torn through brick with their bare hands. The bag showed up the next morning. It was found hanging from a pine tree near the edge of black timber, frozen solid. Inside were pieces of clothing, a wallet, a phone, the man's ID, nothing else. The coroner said there were no remains to examine. We told the press it was an ongoing investigation. Unofficially, the deputies were shaken. These were seasoned men who'd seen overdoses, suicides, car wrecks so bad you couldn't tell where the vehicle ended and the body began. This was different. This was wrong. The calls didn't stop. By midnight, we were telling people not to open their doors for anyone. Lock everything. Stay in one room. Turn on lights. Ignore knocking. Ignore bells. That's when the bells started. Every call after midnight mentioned them. Soft jingling outside. Sometimes from the roof. Sometimes from the walls. One caller said it sounded like the bells were inside her head. At 12:37 a.m., a woman called sobbing, saying her husband had gone outside to see who was there. He put on his boots, she said. He said he'd just look. He said he didn't see anyone. I asked her where he was now. He's not answering, she said. The snow around the porch is gone. Deputies found her husband's boots neatly placed on the steps. His coat lay beside them. No footprints beyond that. Just bare frozen ground, as if the cold itself had burned the snow away. At 1:15 a.m., I got a call from a deputy who sounded scared. We found something, he said. They were near black timber again. Deep in the woods, where the snow should have been waist high, there was a clearing. The ground was bare. Black. Warm enough that steam rose into the air. Hanging from the trees were bags, dozens of them. Some burlap, some red velvet, all stuffed with personal items. Phones rang inside a few of them until the batteries died. Something had dragged a massive object through the clearing, leaving gouges in the earth. The tracks ended abruptly, as if whatever made them had simply vanished. We shut down the roads, called in state police. Even the National Guard was mentioned, though nothing came of it. At 2:04 a.m., my phone rang. Not the dispatch line, my personal cell. I shouldn't have answered it. I know that now. The number was blocked. Hello? I said. You sound tired, a voice replied. Deep, cheerful in a way that made my skin crawl. I hung up immediately. My phone rang again. I know where you are, the voice said when I answered again despite myself. You help people. I slammed the phone down, heart racing. The lights flickered. I was alone in the building. The storm had gotten so bad that deputies were sheltering where they were. I locked the front door, then the back. I checked the windows. Snow pressed against the glass like a living thing. Then I heard it. Bells. Not outside. Inside. Slow jingling coming from the hallway behind the dispatch room. I grabbed the radio and called for help. Static answered me. The jingling grew louder. Heavy footsteps followed, each step shaking the floor. I hid under the desk like a child, pressing my hands over my mouth to keep from making a sound. The door to the dispatch room opened. I saw boots first. Black leather, snowless. Above them, red fabric edged with filthy white trim. A bag dragged across the floor, leaving a wet trail that steamed in the cold air. He stopped in the center of the room. I could see his shadow stretch across the walls, bending where it shouldn't. You work on Christmas, he said softly. That's very kind. I squeezed my eyes shut. Open your eyes, he said, still gentle. I like to be seen. I didn't move. He sighed. That's all right. Some gifts are surprises. Something brushed my hair, cold. So cold, it burned. Then suddenly alarms blared. The emergency generator kicked in, lights flaring bright. The sound was deafening. The footsteps retreated. The bells faded. When deputies reached the building hours later, they found me unconscious under the desk, frostbitten but alive. No signs of forced entry, no footprints. Nothing. Officially, 8 people disappeared that Christmas Eve. Unofficially, the number was higher. Every year since, on Christmas Eve, the sheriff's department shuts down after dark. Calls are routed to the state. No one works alone. Bells are banned from the building. And every year, just after midnight, someone reports hearing jingling in the woods near Black Timber. No one goes to check. Story the end. I grew up believing Christmas was the safest time of year. My parents locked the doors less, neighbors watched out for each other more, and the whole world seemed wrapped in this unspoken agreement that nothing truly bad was allowed to happen while lights were glowing and carols were playing. That belief died the Christmas I worked overnight security at St. Agatha's Regional Hospital in southern Illinois. I was 29 then, newly hired, still learning the building's rhythms. St. Agatha's was old, built in the 1940s, expanded piece by piece over decades. Some wings felt modern, others still smelled faintly of antiseptic and dust, like history had soaked into the walls. Christmas Eve shifts were usually quiet. Most visitors went home early. Skeleton staff handled emergencies. Security mostly walked empty halls and made sure no one stole equipment. That night, a winter storm had settled over the county. Snow piled against the ambulance bay doors. Wind howled through the gaps in the loading dock. By midnight, the hospital felt isolated, like a ship drifting in frozen water. Around 12:30 a.m., the front desk called security. "There's a guy down here dressed as Santa," the receptionist said. "Says he's here to visit sick kids." That wasn't unusual. Local charities sometimes sent volunteers in costume, but visiting hours were over and nothing was scheduled. "I'll check it out," I said. When I reached the lobby, the man stood near the Christmas tree, hands folded neatly in front of him. The suit was traditional, red coat, white trim, but it looked old, the fabric faded and stiff. The beard wasn't fake. It was real, yellowed, hanging unevenly from his face. He smelled faintly of pine and something sour underneath. "Evening," I said. "Visiting hours ended at 10. He smiled slowly. His teeth were small and sharp-looking. "I know," he said. "I'm late this year." I asked for ID. He chuckled softly and reached into his coat. For a moment, I thought he might pull out a knife. Instead, he produced a small handwritten card. On it was a child's name and a room number. "Pediatric Oncology, 3rd floor." I checked the name against the visitor log. The child was real, 8 years old, terminal. "That doesn't mean you can just walk in," I said. "You need clearance." His eyes flicked past me, toward the elevators. "They're expecting me," he said. Against my better judgment, I escorted him upstairs. Something about him made my skin crawl, but nothing he'd done justified kicking him out. On the elevator ride, he hummed softly. I recognized the tune after a few seconds. "Away in a Manger." He hummed it wrong, dragging certain notes, skipping others. When we reached the 3rd floor, the hallway lights flickered. The pediatric wing was quiet, doors closed, machines humming softly. He walked with confidence, like he knew exactly where he was going. At the child's room, he stopped and turned to me. "You don't need to come in," he said gently. Hospital policy said otherwise. I stayed. The boy lay pale and small in his bed, tubes running into his arms. His mother slept in a chair beside him, head tilted back, mouth open. The Santa stepped forward, bells sewn into his coat, jingling softly. The boy's eyes fluttered open. For the first time that night, I saw real emotion cross the Santa's face. Joy. He leaned close to the boy and whispered something I couldn't hear. The boy smiled weakly. "Did you bring it?" the boy asked. The Santa reached into his coat and pulled out a small gift wrapped in brown paper. He placed it gently in the boy's hands. "Open it later," he said, "when it's time." Something about that exchange made my stomach knot. "That's enough," I said. "You need to leave." The Santa straightened slowly and looked at me. "You don't believe anymore," he said. "That's a shame." He left without argument. I escorted him back to the elevator, relief washing over me when the doors closed behind him. I watched the lobby camera as he exited into the snowstorm, disappearing almost immediately. I thought that was the end of it. At 2:17 a.m., a code blue was called in the pediatric wing. The boy was gone when the nurses arrived. Not dead. Gone. Bed empty, tubes ripped out, blood staining the sheets. The window was open, snow blowing in, despite being 3 stories up. Security footage showed nothing. No Santa leaving the floor, no one in the stairwells. The cameras outside the hospital glitched for exactly 4 minutes during the time the boy vanished. The police questioned everyone. The mother collapsed when she woke to find her son missing. Search teams scoured the grounds, the nearby woods, the river. Nothing. 3 hours later, another child disappeared. Then another. All terminal. All from locked rooms, all with windows open. Panic spread through the hospital. Administration tried to keep it quiet, but word leaked. Parents demanded their children be moved. Some fled in the middle of the storm. At 4:46 a.m., the power flickered. Emergency lights kicked on. Over the PA system, a voice began to hum. Away in a manger. The sound echoed through every hallway. I was in the security office when the monitors went white, then snapped back on. Every camera showed the same image. The Santa standing somewhere different in the hospital, staring directly into the lens. He spoke through the speakers. "They're cold," he said softly. "They don't hurt anymore." I grabbed my radio and ran. I found him in the old East Wing, the part of the hospital scheduled for demolition. The halls were dark, paint peeling, the air colder there than anywhere else. He stood at the end of the corridor, surrounded by wheelchairs lined up neatly like an audience. "You took them?" I said, my voice shaking. "Where are they?" He looked genuinely surprised. "I saved them," he said. "No more needles, no more pain, no more waiting." I saw then what was in the sack slung over his shoulder, small shapes, wrapped carefully. "Still." "You don't get to decide that," I said. He tilted his head. "Someone always does." He stepped toward me. The bells rang with each movement, louder than before. I raised my baton, useless and pathetic. "I come every few years," he said calmly, "when the snow is right, when the children are ready." "Ready for what?" He smiled, wider than any human should. "For Christmas morning." I don't remember everything that happened next. I remember screaming. I remember the sound of bones breaking. I remember the cold. I woke up in the ICU on Christmas Day, wrapped in bandages, ribs cracked, concussion severe. The official story said I was assaulted by an unknown intruder who escaped. Hospital administration settled quietly with the families. The missing children were never found. But sometimes, when I close my eyes, I see what he showed me in that hallway. A place deep in the woods, hidden under snow. Small beds made of pine branches. Children sleeping peacefully, wrapped in red cloth, faces relaxed for the first time. Every Christmas since, children go missing across the Midwest, just one or two, always sick, always terminal, always during snowstorms. The news calls it coincidence. I know better. And every year on Christmas Eve, I hear bells outside my window, slow and patient, waiting for me to believe again. Story the end. The winter of 1998 was the coldest anyone in our county could remember. The Ohio River froze in places it never froze before, and the wind coming off it cut through coats like knives. Christmas lights still went up on houses, but fewer people left them on at night. It felt like the dark was watching. I was 32 then, a mail carrier assigned to a rural route outside a small Indiana town most people passed through without noticing. My job was simple: drive the back roads, drop off letters, wave at farmers, keep moving. During December, people tipped a little extra, left cookies in mailboxes, taped cards to their doors. It was the 1 month the route felt warm. Until the week before Christmas. On December 18th, I stopped at a farmhouse I'd delivered to for years, the Wilson place. Elderly couple, quiet, kind. Mrs. Wilson always left a thermos of coffee on the porch for me in winter. That morning, the thermos was still there, frozen solid. No footprints in the snow, no lights on inside, even though it was nearly noon. I knocked. No answer. I chalked it up to a hospital visit or a trip to stay with family. People did that around the holidays. Still, the quiet bothered me. The house felt wrong, like it was holding its breath. 2 days later, a welfare check found both Wilsons dead in their living room chairs, dressed in church clothes, hands folded in their laps. The official cause was carbon monoxide poisoning from a faulty furnace. Case closed quickly. Too quickly. I went to their funeral. The caskets were closed. The pastor spoke about peace and rest and Christmas miracles. I remember staring at the poinsettias and thinking how red they were. On December 22nd, something changed on my route. At the end of a long gravel drive where a new family had moved in during the summer, there was a Christmas tree visible through the front window. That wasn't strange. What was strange was how bare it looked. No tinsel, no ornaments, just white lights and something dark hanging from the branches. I told myself it was my imagination. The next morning, there was a package waiting in my mail truck. It wasn't addressed. No postage. It was sitting on the passenger seat when I unlocked the door like it had always been there. Brown paper. Red twine tied neatly, not rushed, not sloppy. I stood there a long time before touching it. Inside was a small ornament carved from wood. It was shaped like a mailbox, complete with a tiny flag. On the bottom, burned into the wood, was a date. 12/20/98. That was the day the Wilsons were found. I drove straight back to the post office and showed my supervisor. He frowned, asked who'd left it, laughed nervously when I said I didn't know. He told me someone was probably playing a joke, that I should throw it away and get back to work. I didn't throw it away. I put it in my glove compartment. On Christmas Eve, a family on my route didn't answer their door. The Thompsons. 2 parents, 3 kids. The snow was fresh, unbroken. Their minivan sat in the driveway with frost on the windows. I knocked until my knuckles hurt. They were found that night after a neighbor called the police. All 5 were dead, arranged on the living room couch like they were watching TV. The Christmas tree stood behind them, bare, except for 5 ornaments. Each one was made from bone. The papers called it a mass murder. They blamed the father. They always blamed someone easy, but the autopsy showed some that didn't fit. The cuts on their necks were identical. Same depth, same angle, too precise, and something else was missing. Their hearts. Christmas Day came anyway. Stores open, churches filled, snow kept falling. People told each other it was a tragedy, but an isolated one. On December 26th, I found another package in my truck. Inside was a glass ornament. Inside that ornament floated something dark, wrapped in dried veins. A heart. The tag tied to it read, Thompson. I vomited on the side of the road and didn't stop shaking for an hour. I went to the sheriff. He listened. He looked at the ornament. He told me gently that I was under stress, that trauma does strange things to perception. He kept the ornament and told me to take a few days off. I didn't. On December 27th, I delivered mail to a church at the edge of my route. Through the stained glass window, I saw their Christmas tree. It wasn't a tree. It was a structure made of wooden beams bolted together, shaped like one. Hanging from it were dozens of ornaments. Some glass, some wood, some bone, each tagged with a name and a date. I didn't finish my route. Over the next years, I followed the news obsessively. Every Christmas, in towns scattered across Indiana, Ohio, Kentucky, families vanished. Some were found, some weren't. When they were found, there was always a tree, always ornaments, always something missing from the bodies. The pattern was clear to me, even if no one else wanted to see it. The victims weren't random. They were people who kept things running quietly. Mail carriers, utility workers, volunteer firefighters, EMTs, teachers, people who made sure others got what they needed, people who showed up. In 2005, my wife left me. She said I wasn't there anymore, that I stared at nothing, that Christmas made me angry. I didn't argue. In 2007, my supervisor retired. His replacement reassigned routes. I lost the rural one. I thought foolishly that it meant I was safe. That Christmas, a package arrived at my apartment. Brown paper, red twine. Inside was an ornament shaped like a truck. Mail truck. On the back was burned. Soon. I stopped sleeping. I started locking every door and window. I stopped celebrating Christmas altogether. No decorations, no lights, no music. It didn't matter. In 2010, the post office burned down in a small town near where the Wilsons had lived. Inside the ruins, investigators found a structure in the shape of a tree, built from charred beams. Hanging from it were melted glass ornaments. Inside some of them, traces of organic matter. They never released the details. In 2015, a retired mail carrier disappeared on Christmas Eve in Illinois. His truck was found abandoned, doors open, engine cold. Inside, on the seat, was a wrapped package. I knew what was inside without seeing it. Last year, I got the final package. It arrived on December 23rd, sitting neatly at my front door. No footprints in the snow, no sound when I opened the door. Inside was an ornament made of polished bone, carved to look like a man holding letters in his arms. Me. The tag read, "Thank you for your service." That night, I dreamed of a forest filled with trees, each one decorated, stretching as far as I could see. The ornaments clinked softly in the wind. Somewhere, a bell rang. Tonight is Christmas Eve again. I'm writing this because I don't think there will be another chance. Outside, the snow is falling thick and quiet. My phone has no signal. The power flickers every few minutes. There's a knock at the door now, 3 slow taps. I understand, finally. This isn't about punishment. It's about tradition, about balance. Christmas takes and gives, and someone has to be remembered. I'm going to answer the door. Story the end. The first Christmas after my brother Evan disappeared was the coldest winter our town had seen in decades. That's what everyone said anyway. Records broken, pipes frozen solid, schools closed for days at a time. It felt appropriate, like the world itself had decided to mourn with us. Evan vanished on December 22nd, 2011, 2 days before Christmas. He was 26, responsible, the kind of guy who called our mom every Sunday without fail. He worked as a delivery driver for a regional appliance company in western Colorado, covering rural routes most people avoided in winter. He liked the quiet, the long drives, the sense of being useful. That morning, he left our parents' house just after dawn. I remember because I was home visiting and watched him scrape ice off his windshield while humming along to the radio. He joked about getting overtime pay for holiday deliveries and promised he'd be back in time for Christmas Eve dinner. He never came back. At first, no one panicked. Trucks broke down all the time. Phones lost signal in the mountains. By evening, when he hadn't checked in, our dad started calling his work. They said Evan had completed most of his deliveries but never returned the truck to the depot. By midnight, the police were involved. The delivery truck was found early the next morning, parked neatly on the shoulder of a snow-covered county road about 30 miles from town. The engine was off. The keys were gone. The back was empty, except for a single unopened washing machine strapped against the wall. There were no footprints around the truck. None. Not Evan's. Not anyone else's. Just smooth, untouched snow like the road had been abandoned for days. The official explanation at first was exposure. The police said maybe he wandered off disoriented, maybe he slipped into a ravine, maybe animals scattered any evidence. They told us these things gently, like they were talking to children. But my mother knew better. She kept saying the same thing over and over. Evan wouldn't leave the truck. She was right. Evan was trained to stay put. He drilled it into all of us after a winter survival course his company made drivers take. If you break down, you stay with the vehicle. Period. The search went on for weeks. Volunteers combed the area. Dogs tracked scents that went nowhere. Helicopters scanned frozen valleys and tree lines. Nothing. Christmas came and went in a haze of phone calls, casseroles dropped off by neighbors, and the sound of my mother crying behind closed doors. Evan's presence sat untouched under the tree. None of us could bring ourselves to move them. In January, the case went cold. For the next 2 years, our lives were split into before and after. Every holiday was quieter. Every phone call made my heart race. My mother started sleeping with the porch light on, convinced Evan would come home in the middle of the night, confused and freezing. The police checked in occasionally, always with the same look in their eyes, apology without answers. Then, in December of 2013, something changed. A woman named Linda Morales went missing from a town about 60 miles south of where Evan disappeared. She was 52, a home health nurse driving back from a patient's house on December 23rd. Her car was found abandoned on a Forest Service road, doors unlocked, hazard lights flashing, no footprints. The similarities were impossible to ignore. This time, the investigation went differently. State police got involved, then the FBI. They didn't tell us much, but rumors spread quickly in small towns. People whispered about a serial offender, about someone who targeted drivers around Christmas when roads were empty and people were distracted. In early 2014, a break finally came. A maintenance worker clearing snow near an old hunting cabin stumbled across something buried just beneath the surface of a frozen creek. At first, he thought it was debris. Then he saw fabric, then a hand. The remains were badly decomposed, but the personal items told the story. A nurse's badge, keys, a phone crushed beyond use. Linda Morales. The autopsy revealed something worse. She hadn't died from exposure. She'd been restrained, strangled. The task force widened the search area, revisiting old missing persons cases from surrounding states. That's when Evan's name came up again. In August of 2014, nearly 3 years after Evan vanished, they found him, or what was left of him. His remains were discovered in a shallow grave deep in the national forest, miles from where his truck had been found. The ground was rocky and uneven. not somewhere someone would wander accidentally. He'd been buried under branches and stones, deliberately hidden. The cause of death was homicide. I remember the detective sitting at our kitchen table, hands folded, voice low and careful. I remember my mother's face going blank, like something inside her finally broke beyond repair. Evan hadn't frozen. He hadn't gotten lost. Someone had taken him. The next part didn't come out until the trial. In late 2015, a man named Harold Kemp was arrested during a routine traffic stop in Wyoming. He was in his early 60s, retired, living off a modest pension. In the back of his SUV, police found rope, duct tape, and a handgun. None of that was illegal by itself. What made them look closer was the notebook. It was tucked under the passenger seat. Inside were dates, locations, and short notes. Some pages were torn out. Some entries were crossed through. December appeared again and again. When investigators searched Kemp's property, they found more notebooks, maps with rural roads circled, newspaper clippings of missing persons, a locked freezer in his garage that held items no family ever wants to see identified. Kemp confessed eventually, not out of remorse, but out of pride. He talked for hours. He said he'd started years earlier after his wife died suddenly in December. He said Christmas felt too loud after that, too happy, too fake. He wanted silence. He targeted people alone on rural roads during the holidays, delivery drivers, nurses, travelers trying to make it home. He staged breakdowns or followed vehicles until they stopped. He knew which roads lost cell service. He knew where snow erased evidence quickly. He called it taking Christmas back. When shown Evan's photo, Kemp smiled. He tried to be helpful, Kemp said. They always do. The trial made national news, but it didn't bring closure. Nothing ever could. Kemp was convicted of 7 murders across 3 states. Investigators believe the real number is higher. Some bodies were never found. Some families are still waiting for answers. Kemp died in prison in 2019 from a heart attack 3 days before Christmas. Now, every December, news stations rerun safety tips. Don't stop for stranded vehicles. Keep your doors locked. Trust your instincts. It feels hollow. Our family still gathers on Christmas Eve, though it's quieter now. Evan's stocking still hangs by the fireplace. My mother insists. She says as long as it's there, he's not completely gone. Sometimes, when snow starts falling early and the world goes quiet, I think about Evan scraping ice off his windshield, humming off key, smiling because he was headed home. I think about how kindness was the last thing he carried with him. And I think about how many people disappear around Christmas, their stories buried under snow and silence, while the rest of the world celebrates. Every year when I see flashing hazard lights on the side of a dark road, my heart pounds. And I keep driving, not because I don't care, but because caring almost destroyed us. Story the end. Christmas was never loud in our house. Even when I was a kid, it was the quiet kind of holiday. Soft music, low lights, my father drinking coffee at the table while snow pressed against the windows like it wanted in. That quiet is what fooled us. Quiet makes you believe nothing bad is happening. In December of 2004, I was 27 and living back home in rural Indiana after a divorce I didn't want to talk about. My parents' farmhouse sat at the end of a gravel road surrounded by cornfields that looked dead and endless in winter. The nearest neighbor was nearly a mile away. At night, the darkness felt physical, like it had weight. My father, Glenn, was a volunteer firefighter. On December 21st, he got a call just after 10 p.m., a reported fire alarm at an abandoned meatpacking plant about 15 minutes out of town. False alarms were common there. Faulty wiring. Squatters. He kissed my mother on the cheek, told her he'd be back soon, and left his coffee half-finished on the table. He never came home. At first, nobody panicked. Radios go dead sometimes. Roads ice over. Around midnight, my mother started calling the station. No answer. At 1 a.m., she called the county sheriff. A patrol car drove out to the plant and found my dad's truck parked outside, engine cold, driver's door open. There was no sign of him inside. The search lasted 3 days. Firefighters, deputies, volunteers, dogs. They combed the fields, the creek beds, the building itself. No blood, no footprints, no struggle. Just my father's helmet sitting neatly on a concrete ledge inside the plant, placed like someone meant for it to be found. On Christmas Eve, the sheriff came to our house and told us what people say when they don't know anything useful. No evidence of foul play. He may have wandered off. Exposure is a possibility. My mother nodded politely and offered him coffee. That night, she set out my father's stocking anyway. Christmas Day came and went in a blur. I remember the sound of wrapping paper tearing, the way my mother smiled too hard, the empty chair at the table. I remember thinking the house felt larger without him, like the walls had moved back. On December 26th, a package arrived. It was sitting on the front porch when I opened the door that morning. Snow piled around it. No footprints. Brown paper, red twine tied carefully in a bow. My mother thought it was from one of the volunteer departments. A condolence gift. I told her I'd open it. Inside was a small wooden ornament, hand-carved. It was shaped like a fire helmet. Detailed. Accurate. Too accurate. On the back, burned into the wood, were 4 numbers. 1221. I dropped it. My mother picked it up before I could stop her. She stared at it for a long time, then placed it gently back in the box and closed the lid. "We'll give it to the sheriff," she said. Her voice didn't shake. The sheriff took the ornament. He frowned, asked some questions, wrote things down. He said it was probably someone trying to be cruel, that grief makes people do strange things. He promised to look into it. He never mentioned it again. In February, my mother started leaving the porch light on all night. In March, she stopped sleeping in her bedroom and moved to the couch. In April, she told me she heard my father walking around outside after midnight, boots crunching on gravel. By the next December, she barely spoke. On December 20th, 2005, another package arrived. Same brown paper, same red twine. This one was heavier. Inside was a glass ornament, perfectly clear. Suspended inside was something gray and curved, a piece of bone. There was a tag tied to the hook. My father's name, written in careful block letters. I drove straight to the sheriff's office. He looked pale when he saw it. He made a call, then another. State police came. The ornament was bagged and taken away. They told us not to worry, that they were expanding the investigation. 2 days later, on December 22nd, a man named Harold Finch disappeared from a town 40 miles north of us. He was a retired electrician, last seen leaving a Christmas party at the VFW Hall. His truck was found parked near a grain elevator. Inside, on the passenger seat, was a wrapped package. Brown paper, red twine. They didn't tell us that part officially. A deputy who knew my father told me quietly over a beer like he was confessing something. On December 27th, Finch's body was found. He was posed sitting upright against the elevator wall, arms folded. His chest had been opened. His heart was missing. Hanging from a nearby ladder rung was a glass ornament. Inside floated a small dark mass. The newspapers called it a bizarre homicide. The sheriff assured the public there was no connection to my father's disappearance. But the ornaments kept coming. Every Christmas, another one, sometimes to us, sometimes to someone else. Always brown paper, always red twine, always dated. In 2007, a high school teacher vanished on December 19th. His ornament was shaped like a book. In 2009, a young woman disappeared after leaving a late shift at a diner. Her ornament was a tiny coffee cup carved from wood. In 2011, a farmer went missing from his property. His ornament was a tractor wheel, detailed down to the treads. Each time, the body, if it was found, was staged somewhere isolated. Each time, something was taken. And each time, the ornament appeared before the body. I started keeping records, dates, names, locations. I noticed something the police didn't want to. Every victim had responded to an emergency call of some kind. Volunteer firefighters, EMTs, off-duty cops, people who went out when others called for help, people like my father. In 2012, my mother died of a stroke 2 days before Christmas. I buried her on December 24th, the ground frozen solid. I went back to the empty farmhouse and sat in the dark, drinking whiskey I didn't like. At 11:47 p.m., there was a knock at the door. 3 slow taps. I didn't answer. The knock came again. When I opened the door, there was no one there. Just a package on the porch. This ornament was different. It was a small mirror, framed in wood. On the back was burned a date I hadn't seen yet, 12/25/2013. I understood then that this wasn't about death alone. It was about witnessing, about being present. I sold the house in the spring, moved to Kentucky, changed jobs, changed my phone number. I stopped celebrating Christmas altogether. No lights, no tree, no music. It didn't matter. On December 23rd, 2013, my new address received a package forwarded from the old one. The postmark was local. Inside was an ornament shaped like a house. On December 24th, a volunteer paramedic named Lisa Monroe went missing after responding to a car accident call on a rural road less than 10 miles from where I lived. Her ornament arrived on Christmas morning. In 2016, I finally spoke to an FBI agent who had been quietly tracking similar cases across several Midwestern states. He didn't deny the pattern. He didn't explain it either. We don't know how, he said. We don't know who. And we don't know why Christmas. But you know it's not stopping, I said. He didn't answer that. Last year, in December 2024, I received the final ornament. It was wrapped like all the others. Inside was a small wooden figure carved to look like a man standing in a doorway. Me. On the back was burned today's date. I am writing this on Christmas Eve. The snow is falling again, thick and quiet. The house is dark. I've turned off my phone. I can hear the wind moving through the trees outside, the sound of something patient. I don't know if this is punishment or tradition or something older than all of us. I only know that when the knock comes, I will answer it. Because everyone else did. Because someone always has to, and because the ornaments don't lie. Story the end.